Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Football Unraveled podcast, the podcast which seeks to unravel the murky underbelly behind the beautiful game that we all love. So we have a really fascinating topic for us to cover today, and I think an equally fascinating panel. So for our first episode, we have somewhat of a father and son duo double act. My name is Daniel Stabler, and joining me with the hosting duties today is actually my father, David Stabler. Say hello, Dad.
Hello, Dad.
How are you doing?
I'm fine, thank you, Dan. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. So just for context, me and him are both Brighton and Hove Albion fans. He is originally from Newcastle, so we do have a bit of a soft spot for the Mags as well. We are definitely going to cover sports washing and the Newcastle United ownership model in upcoming episodes, but I think for this episode, we're determined not to turn it into just another fan podcast for either Brighton or Newcastle. So we are lucky to have for our first episode another father and son duo in the form of Stephen and Oisin Harris. So how are you doing, Stephen?
Grand, thanks. All good.
And how are you doing, Oisin?
Yeah, I'm good, thanks, Dan.
So you're both Leeds fans. Happy with the transfer business so far? Any words on Daniel Farke?
I like Farke.
I like Parker as well. Yeah, he's looking good.
Yeah.
I think the transfer business, we could see a bit more action maybe, but
Transfer business has been dreadful. It's just been loaning out everybody for no income. It's crazy.
What was the financial state of Leeds when he went down? Actually, I mean, because I seem to remember Leeds seem to be tipped to go straight back up again, but Leicester were the ones that would seem doomed.
We're the strongest state of all the relegated clubs. So we were way more stable than Sunderland and Leicester. So we only had to loan players out because they had clauses in their contract for relegation.
Yeah,
and so
I think we're
bought last summer have done that basically.
Yeah, I think we're interested in Tyler Adams, but yeah, you're probably going to get picked apart a little bit, aren't you? But
you can have them. Honestly, you can have them all. I'm happy to lose those.
The ones that have gone, I've been really pleased to lose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm not sure. Yeah, we'll see. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the podcast. So what we're looking at today is the transfer window. Specifically, I think what we're going to try and look at is the role that the media takes within the transfer window. So the main question we're going to be answering then, I guess, is it all too much? So I think we're going to have some fairly interesting perspectives on this. Obviously, we come from different camps in terms of supporting teams, but I would also bet that we have some fairly interesting, let's call it generational perspectives. Me and Oisin, I think, have obviously grown up under the shadow of the internet, social media, and Sky Sports, and that's probably influenced a lot of our opinions and interests into football. Whereas, from my understanding, the two of you, let's call you the elder statesmen of the podcast, would have grown up under the shadow of rationing, black and white football, cigarette smoke in the changing rooms, and flat caps. Dad, you still haven't seen a Newcastle United lifting a trophy, though. So,
No.
So let's first look at the history of the transfer window. So I'm going to pass this on to you, Dad.
Yeah, well, the transfer window came in, was a fairly new invention, and it was imposed on the Premier League by the UEFA in 2002-03 in an attempt to prevent smaller clubs being disrupted throughout the season. Cash-based transfers weren't anything new. They've been going back to at least 1893, when one of the earliest high-profile examples was a top international called Jack Southworth, Blackburn Rovers forward and England international. And he joined Everton for £400. I mean, we could buy him now. Rules were put in place at the same time to ensure that players had to register with the FA. The clubs held the FA registration, and players had to gain permission from the FA before being able to move during a season. And a maximum wage was agreed as well. So there was no incentive to join a bigger club for bigger wages, because if you were playing for Bristol Rovers and you wanted to join mighty Aston Villa, they were paying £4, and you know, Bristol Rovers could pay you £3.50. There probably wasn't a massive difference. All the power lay in the hands of the clubs themselves. There was a transfer deadline day put in place for the end of the season. I don't know if you remember this, Stephen, but it was like 31st of March, where you couldn't actually make a transfer after that period in case clubs that were going for the title or had something to play for just pilfered clubs who were quite willing to let their players go in because they had nothing left to play for at that point, and they figured that wasn't fair. So there was an early transfer deadline day, 31st of March, and a system called retain and transfer, in which clubs held all the power. They could refuse to pay players if they put in a transfer request and refused to sell, which a very high-profile case. Newcastle United had one of those in the late 60s. George Eastham, who took them to court and won his case in the end. But there's a fascinating book that I read by Gary Imlach about his father, Stuart Imlach, who was a World Cup player, Scottish international, won the FA Cup with Nottingham Forest, etc. So he wasn't a small fry at all. And in that book, it's late 50s, he's called in to speak to the boardroom, and they say, we've had an offer from Coventry City, we've accepted it, and you're off to Coventry. You know, he had no say in that whatsoever. His entire family then pack up and go to Coventry, and then Derby, and then, the players had little or no say. So two things then happened: end of the maximum wage in the early 60s and a weakening of the retain and transfer rules. And then throughout the 80s, globalization and into the 90s made some clubs much more powerful, much more lucrative, and able to buy players at will because they had a lot more money. The Bosman ruling in 95 changed the picture again. Players then held all the cards. And so in an attempt to prevent this new world, basically, from becoming untenable for smaller clubs, the transfer window came in 2002. And then we end up with, it starts off fairly slowly, but then we end up in the media, it becoming such a big thing that by 2012, Sky Sports News are claiming that their deadline day drama will be played out, quotes, against the backdrop of a busy night in the Premier League. So you then get to the stage where transfers are more important than the actual football that's going on in the background. So that's basically a very quick, hopefully, summary of the transfer window. Well, how we got to it anyway, Dan.
Yeah, very quick, yes. Stephen, then, so maybe let's move on to the kind of perspectives that we have on the transfer window. So Stephen, and then also Dad, what was your perspective of the transfer window when it first came in, and then how do you think your perspectives have changed since then?
I think when it first came in, it was, I thought it was a good development. I thought it would be, it seemed a better idea than players. The big clubs still picked off the players despite the deadline, for buying players. The big clubs still picked off the best players from the smaller clubs, and some sort of change seemed appropriate. And I think the Bosman ruling brought about a lot of changes with players running out of the contract, but I don't think it's worked at all. I think now, at the end of every season, so many changes take place in a small period of time. I think it destabilizes almost everyone, and I don't think it's to the benefits of any of the clubs or really any of the players. The winners are the media, but then the media really, Sky and the media really run sport. They put all the money into it, and they've got their rolling news coverage, and they've got to find out stuff that happens every day to keep their viewers. I don't really care about that, but I don't think the transfer window works. I think there's far too many loans that happen because of that. It's caused clubs to really load their squads far bigger squads than really ought to be needed. I think it's to the detriment of the smaller teams who lose their players, who then sit on the bench for the bigger clubs. So I don't think it works. I think it ought to end in some respect. It may be that the number of transfers could be limited, but it's difficult with freedom of movement for players.
From my perspective, I remember being pleased when it came in as well. I thought it was a good idea, because if you're following someone like Brighton and Newcastle too, to that and Leeds, you don't want your players going all periods of the season, which had been the case, but hadn't felt quite as vulnerable, because I don't know whether, Stephen might agree with me, but I don't remember transfer sagas going on and on and on. In the past, the media didn't run the transfer story. We had players like, my first one was Brian Pop Robson, who went to West Ham from Newcastle. All I remember waking up is finding he was no longer a Newcastle player. I don't know whether there was a saga before, but Cantona went from Leeds to Man United. It was just one day he was a Leeds player, the next day he was a Man United player. Andy Cole, similar. They were just suddenly playing for Manchester United. There wasn't this interminable sort of week on, week off, Caicedo, will he go, Trossard at Arsenal, whatever, I think
there was some information, not about every transfer, but I'm certain about some transfers there was speculation that, a club wanted someone else. I don't remember Jordan and McQueen going to Man United being out of the blue and an enormous shock. I think it was flagged up that was happening. And I think many of the purchases that, many of the players that came into Leeds, I don't think they were there somewhere overnight. But in fact, even now under the transfer window, certainly as a Leeds fan, the previous regime may have been complete morons now we know the sort of contracts they engineered, but the buys that Leeds made, we spent weeks being linked with just about every player in the world, and then they bought someone that we'd never heard of, and they managed to keep it under the radar. They managed to keep the real deals under the radar. So I don't think it's necessarily true that we weren't aware of it, but it didn't seem interminable.
I think the Leeds thing's pretty new though, isn't it? Like that wasn't the way, even last season or last summer at Leeds. I feel like the links we knew about them way in advance. I guess it's how you go about doing business, isn't it? Because I think this regime at Leeds are purposely trying to keep things under wraps, to not be really showy, and to kind of, I think, demonstrate by doing rather than talking about. I just want to ask David and Dad your question. Transfers with medicals and stuff, how long did that take back in the day? Like, obviously part of the saga now is that things do take longer. You have the medical, you have negotiations with agents, things like that. Was that just all not happening, in the 70s?
I think medicals are done in a couple of hours even now. I don't think it was ever an enormous issue.
It seems to,
aren't you?
It seems to be that there are a lot of steps which are publicized within the media, and it's almost as if every single step that's taken is breaking news. So like Haaland to Man City, Haaland's on his flight to Manchester, Haaland's doing his medical, Haaland has picked out his locker in the changing room at Man City. Every single step is breaking news.
You don't have to care or follow it.
But you don't, but people do. That's the issue.
But if people want to, that's their decision and their choice. I don't want to. I don't care. And
But I think people care about it because they're being told to care about it. If you have everyone on Twitter and all these journalists saying this is really important, then you are going to assume it's really important, whether or not it actually is important.
Right? I don't assume it's important.
I think for me, it's that, like, the transfer window coming in, it's become another thing, another phenomena for the media to kind of latch onto and to create into this massive thing, this massive phenomena. And it's also given fans another way to get a win over other fan groups. So you've now got the thing of winning the transfer window, which is ludicrous because last year Tottenham won the transfer window and they had a terrible season, but it gave them something to kind of latch onto. And over the last few months, what I've noticed between Brighton and Chelsea is that the fan groups have started to become very frustrated with each other, and there's almost a rivalry that has developed, not because of anything to do with football or on the pitch. It's purely a transfer. And I think without the transfer window existing under some way, and the way in which the media can now latch onto it as a new thing, it then gives fans an extra way of saying to each other, we got one over on you because we got your player for cheap. When in my mind that doesn't matter, but it's just, is that great? Is it great?
Yeah, that's great. Football's all about getting one. Yeah, the entire game is about getting one over the opposition.
I guess so.
This stupid rivalry that doesn't actually harm anyone. It's brilliant. I mean, the transfer window, sometimes it's quite entertaining.
Yeah, I think it serves to be something entertaining to keep the fans tied over for the summer. Which, and I think it's basically driven in the media as something to keep fans interested. Sky Sports will have nothing to show over the summer if it isn't for
including
transfers,
a World Cup year, actually.
Yeah. Well, there's a World Cup going on right now, and what are we doing? We're talking about transfers. So I guess that it's symbolic of how invested we get into it, I guess.
But you could argue, Dan, that even without a transfer window, the media would, if in the current age, would have got involved, and just would be going on all the time. I mean, in the old days, you asked Sheen about how transfers actually used to happen, and anecdotally, used to read about meetings taking place on sort of roadside service stations on the A1 or whatever between two managers, and they'd quietly get their player to meet the manager. And so Brian Clough would meet George Graham and a player or whoever, I'm making up or whoever the manager of Birmingham was, to sign Trevor Francis. And that would most of that would happen in a roadside cafe, and maybe some incentives or whatever, but that's not part of the story. And then suddenly the next day the player would be Nottingham Forest player. Not Trevor Francis has joined Nottingham Forest from Birmingham, but roadside cafes seem to take an awful lot of, quietly take part, and the tales. Maybe that's mostly anecdotally, but
people couldn't.
The media there wasn't a media involvement as much. Sorry, carry on.
So no, they couldn't text. They had to meet somewhere. Phone calls and things, and
exactly
didn't exist. You had to actually meet in person.
Are there any transfers that Are there any transfers that kind of stick with you because they left halfway through a season before the transfer window came in? So I think you said that in the middle of the season, a player could go, right? So are there any particular transfers that kind of stick with you, and that perhaps, so say for instance, if Caicedo went to Chelsea tomorrow, my Twitter feed would be filled with Chelsea fans mocking me or having a go at Brighton for that. But say, are there any particular transfers that you remember happening, especially before the transfer window, in the middle of the season, that you felt as if left you with a bit of bitterness about you?
I can't think of any transfers that I felt cost us the league or won us the league.
Not Cantona then.
Oh yeah, well, Cantona cost us everything. but the timing of it didn't matter.
When in the season?
I was just firstly that he left, and secondly that he went to Manchester United for peanuts.
What about Rio Ferdinand, Dad? That one must have hurt a bit.
Ferdinand hurt a little, but it wasn't an enormous surprise because you knew he'd been tapped up at the World Cup, and Leeds. You kind of also knew that Leeds were falling apart post the fight and O'Leary losing it all. So it wasn't an enormous surprise. It was the way that everything crumbled thereafter.
Does Jewel fall into that bracket as well, where that's a very painful transfer, but because everything's collapsing and
Ferdinand hadn't been at Leeds long enough for it to be such a disaster. Woodgate going was more hurtful, really,
right?
Because Woodgate was Leeds. It was losing Milner and Woodgate and
the young talent sort of
going,
I mean, I can remember when Andy Cole went, for example, but I think he went. I was thinking about that, and I'd have to look this up, but I think he went in January anyway. So it kind of made no odds. We lost him in what would have been the January transfer window if there had been one. I think Cantona was around about September, October, wasn't he?
Yeah, start of the season essentially.
Yeah.
Would you have seen the same amount of? You mentioned Rio. I think we said Rio Ferdinand was tapped up at the World Cup, but would you have seen the same amount of tapping up in the media as you do nowadays? So, clubs aren't necessarily allowed to tap up other clubs' players, but they can leak a story out into the media and say that they're interested in this particular player, and then suddenly their heads turned and the squad is disrupted. Was there still that level of media tapping up of players back in the day?
Not media tapping up, because we wouldn't have seen it, but you can be sure that it existed. That if a player wanted to go and they had agents, it was made known, and clearly, international duty, players got on, persuaded people to come to their clubs. That's how it worked. That's probably how it still works, really.
And Bellingham, that was. I know Bellingham didn't end up at Liverpool, but he was tapping him up for a long time.
There's always every tournament. There's always pictures of one player with his arm around another player, and it said,
Well, there was that whole Henderson and Bellingham almost loving thingy after one game. It just looked. It looked like they needed to get a room, which is. But in the end, Bellingham went to Real Madrid and Henderson went elsewhere. So
yes, that's true. All right, maybe we move to more to the modern landscape then. So, so from my perspective, social media, in my social media feed, I see a constant barrage of rumors and gossip, most of which I think is basically just tosh and basically clickbait. But there are a few names which seem to garner a little bit of trust. One name is Fabrizio Romano. He's seemingly built a career out of getting to the gist of a transfer just minutes before everyone else, and then has really built a very successful career from that. And his catchphrase of "Here we go" seems to hold a significant amount of weight within transfer gossip. And I know a lot of people in my generation seem to flock to his tweets for the lowdown on any transfers. So Oisin, so let's go to you then. With yourself being you're probably the youngest, and well, out of everyone on the podcast, you're probably more down with the kids than anyone else.
Well, don't say
that. How do you go about keeping up with the transfer window? Do you follow the "Here we go" tweets, or are you still keeping up with Sky Sports or anything?
I don't keep up with Sky Sports in terms of watching on TV ever. I don't watch Sky Sports for news unless I'm watching football, and then it's on afterwards. With keeping up with transfers, it's Twitter definitely, and as long as I've used Twitter, it's been Twitter. Obviously, like you say, Fabrizio Romano is kind of the international go-to. He's a sort of respected name. He's quite annoying, I think, on Twitter.
He is a bit annoying, yeah.
Yeah, he's kind of sliding in seconds before. I think obviously the transfers I care most about are Leeds transfers, and for those ones, I will just go for Phil Hay, Graham Smythe, the Leeds journalists who are well known.
Yeah,
they work for the Athletic or the Yorkshire Evening Post or the BBC or whatever. And then for the international ones, I find that when a transfer actually happens, it's not just Fabrizio Romano talking about it. You know, everyone is talking about it on Twitter. So you kind of don't need to keep up with those transfer sagas in the same way. Whereas the Leeds ones, I mean, to my shame, I do kind of keep up with them and I do keep track of them. And actually, I think I use Reddit quite a lot with the Leeds subreddit as well now, because they have a tier system of source information. So tier 1 to tier 5 on how reliable that information source is. So for, like Phil Hay, who works at Athletic, is tier 1, he's reliable. And they'll have tier 5, which would be some like terrible like Spanish sports website, which will say we're linked with some centre back, you know. But the point is they feed it all to you, but they let you know the quality of the source it's coming from, and that kind of helps you figure out how much potential to pay for it.
And I never knew that these kind of things existed, because I see in my Twitter feed just a whole load of nonsense usually, and then I have to it feels like I have to do research to find out if this particular guy is tweeting about something that's, yeah. So I didn't know that, like, you get these tier lists on Reddit. I think that's why we've got someone of your generation in this podcast, Sheet. You can tell us about all the, all the Reddit threads that help you out. Yeah. I'm 3 or 4 years older.
Yeah, he's not miles.
I think technically I'm a millennial still. So yeah.
Rushing's discussed. I barely use Twitter, but I use news now every day, and it is just clickbait. But
I know, and I tell you,
it's also Yorkshire Post, and there's a few dedicated Leeds things. And if I can't be bothered to go through the Athletic, most of it is just saying Phil Hay said this. Or, you know, this is what was reported by, as he says, Graham Scott. So I get all the nonsense speculation, but just the lead stuff, because the other stuff I don't really care about, to be honest.
It's just noise, isn't it, really?
I think one of the there's got to be a distinction between what is gossip and what's actual news, and I've noticed that on some of the more like reputable media organizations. So I look at the Guardian, the BBC and the Guardian fairly regularly, and I think they both have gossip and they have news sections. And the gossip will be a place where people can just kind of chat about, or there's rumors basically there, and then the news is where there's news on actual concrete things happening. But I find that, like, there's a lot of social media organizations, I probably shouldn't name them, but Sport Bible, for instance, is one, where there's no distinction between gossip and news. And they're then, because their whole business model is based on clickbait, then you're drawn in to click on something absolutely outrageous. And I think, to be honest with you, I think that kind of hurts smaller teams, because rumors usually are about bigger teams making signings, because the bigger teams have more of an international fan base, more likely for people to click on them. So, and it's usually about them buying the players from smaller clubs. So I find myself getting riled up by seeing Sport Bible headlines which says Chelsea are going to get Brighton's replacement for Caicedo, and I think there's absolutely no evidence for that. But because they've heard of some rumor on Twitter, and then they then posted an article about it on their website. But they don't have any distinction between gossip and news. So for me, I kind of feel like that hurts the smaller clubs in the long run. It disrupts their squads, and it gives Chelsea fans the opportunity to try and get one over on Brighton, which they haven't really had they haven't done a lot of recently. So, but yeah, that's kind of one of my issues at the moment, I think.
Is that an issue, though? I mean, I don't listen to any. I don't really. The first time I know about a transfer about to happen is if somebody at work, normally the same person, I won't name them, tells me that Fabrizio Romano has said something. And because I don't have a Twitter feed, or I scroll past a lot of junk on Facebook or something that tells me that Brighton or somebody else is interested in a Brighton player, etc. But I don't really believe any of it until it gets to the point. Actually, I don't believe any of it until they've actually signed and I've seen them in the shirt. So it's kind of, I think to me, I don't really get riled by any of it.
I don't necessarily think the harm is in riling up fans. I think the harm, and I'm going to use the Caicedo example again because that's something that has been stressing me out all summer. But there's been so many rumors about this, and a lot of it isn't even founded in anything actually concrete. Now, Caicedo's a young man, and he spent the entire summer. He should have been preparing for his season ahead at Brighton, but the constant rumor mill is just surely a disturbance for his own mental health and for his own understanding of where he sits as a footballer. And it's not good for clubs like Brighton to have their players constantly under that kind of microscope. Paul Barber, sorry, one of you go.
Dave, you're going to go, sorry.
I was going to say, except that I think the business model for Brighton is they will sell him for 100 million or whatever it is, 80 million eventually, and they will do it this summer. And I'm absolutely convinced of that. So it's basically the end game. I personally think they've allowed that will happen. That will happen this summer because that's what the Brighton model is. So we have to accept that. And accept that Caicedo probably knows it's going to happen. So he's not really preparing for a Brighton season. He's preparing for a wherever.
All right. I've got another example.
He's a professional footballer, and he's got people around him. He's going to want to play as best he can for whoever he plays for. He's going to want to play for a team that's challenging for trophies.
Yeah.
And Chelsea are going to be doing that and possibly earn more money. But he's not going to up sticks and refuse to play because they won't sell him. He'll still be trying to enhance his value and do as well as he can. It disturbs him at all.
He may down tools though, because there's so many rumors about him that he may down. So today there was a rumor come out that
this is just nonsense gossip and rumor to fill space.
It is, but then it comes back to the players and the clubs eventually. That's the way I see it.
The clubs will know what's actually going on, Dan. Like Brighton and Caicedo will have talked, and there'll be some clarity on where they stand. Like it might not be we're going to sell him. We think he's definitely going to leave, but like you can pick up in these conversations how a player feels and how the club feels. So the rumors are they're not to affect the player. Like Caicedo is a professional. He hasn't gotten this far being shakeable by a Twitter rumor. I think the reality of it is that like it's to feed the beast of football fans on Twitter and keep them fed rather than anything to do with Brighton, Chelsea, or Caicedo at all. Like I don't think it actually factors into their thinking one iota.
And to play for a season against his will with a lesser team, he did well enough and moved to Arsenal. The speculation that he was wanted to join the club of his dreams, which was denied him, didn't call him to be a lesser player.
Exactly. So couldn't have put it better myself, Steve. But is Caicedo worse off in that scenario? Let's say it's not Caicedo, but Mr. X, because we're turning it into Caicedo. But is that player, whoever he is, worse off than in 1958, Stuart Imlach suddenly being told, we've accepted a deal for you and tomorrow you're at Derby County? He's got more say in this than he did in those days. It's it's
the trend of everything moving towards the individual. I mean, like you say, clubs have more power, the historical institutions have more power, but the nature of globalism and capitalism and the kind of 80s individualism that's pushed on everyone is that the individuals have the power. Like it's true in football, it's true in music, it's true in film. The studios are currently taking on, in film studios are currently taking on writers and actors and things. But the reality is that like the reason that's a fair fight these days is because people like, Colin Farrell or these famous stars can help publicize the SAG-AFTRA union's cause. It becomes bigger news because Nicole Kidman's down on the picket line, not just some random actors. I think it's sort of similar with footballers. Like it's not the worst thing in the world that the people who essentially make the money because they're the entertainment, they're the product. We watch football to watch good footballers play football. It's not the worst thing in the world that they're given more power and autonomy over their situation. and they're paid really well because they work really hard, and it is really difficult to become that level of professional footballer. So fair enough, they should be able to choose where they want to play. I'm not saying it should be a complete mercenary market, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world if Caicedo has a bit of freedom and autonomy in deciding where he plays next season.
I don't think that was entirely and I appreciate that maybe I'm playing the role of the devil's advocate in this current debate, but I'm going to give an example. So today there was reports that Caicedo at the Brighton and Hove Albion player awards ceremony yesterday, he won Player of the Season last year, but there were rumours come from that basically that he had said to people there that he was looking to move away and that he was looking to leave the club and he wanted to leave the club. The speech he gave didn't mention any of that, and he said that he's looking forward to continuing to play with the club, basically. But he apparently had said to people that he was looking to move away. And whether that's true or not, I can't imagine he would want that getting out that much. But I do think that if he now stays with Brighton, I think Brighton fans would forgive him. But, let's say it's player X, a fan group may then start to turn on player X because these rumours, which might not be founded in anything, come out. They strain the relationship between the fans and the players. So I think there are instances in where the Twitter and media sphere do harm a player's position and their own mental health and their own understanding of where they're playing, specifically when it comes to transfers.
Peter Odemwingie, for example. So that's the name you're looking for, the famous one.
Yes,
player
Odemwingie.
He's not the only one. Yeah, Peter Odemwingie, 2013. The
QPR guy turns up at the training ground.
Yeah, it's quite funny.
He turned up at QPR and he sat outside QPR waiting for a deal to go through on the final day. I mean, that basically it kind of ruined his career at West Brom when he had to go back to West Brom. There was no deal on the table for QPR, but because he tried to force the deal through by enthusiastically leaping into his car and going down there, I don't think he ever recovered from that at West Brom. And I suppose that's the sort of thing you're.
Yeah, I think that's because probably there was a rumor in the Twitter sphere or in the media that he had been linked with QPR. His head was turned and he thought, you know what, I'm going to try and force through this move. So he drives down to QPR and then he gets completely humiliated and ruins his relationship with the fans. Whereas, if the media isn't speculating to the extent that they are, if there is a clearer distinction between gossip and fact, he would have known that there wasn't a link between him and QPR and there wasn't any reason for him to ruin his relationship with West Brom fans. So
I don't know that there wasn't a genuine link with QPR, and he would have had an agent who would have been telling him what he should or shouldn't do. He probably got terrible advice from his agent, or what they wanted from QPR ended up not being on the table. And it did ruin his relationship with the fans. But the reality is, if he'd been picked and he played well, they'd soon be on his side again. Yeah, that's what happens. And when you're talking about Caicedo, allegedly saying things, the speech saying I'm looking forward to the season, but apparently saying I want to leave. Well, you don't know the truth, and even the speech saying I'm looking forward to being here next season could well be lies. They're going to say the right things. He has told and trained now to say the right things.
He has to say that. Yeah.
All of the speculation is nothing but speculation. The reality is, if he really wants to leave, he'll have told the club that. And the club don't really want a player that doesn't want to be there, so they'll be looking to maximise what they can get for him.
Yeah.
But wasn't it? Was it last season? Harry Kane really wanted to go, said there was a gentleman's agreement, and Spurs reneged on what he believed was a gentleman's agreement. I don't think the fans were against him. He played particularly bad because he didn't get the transfer he wanted, and he made it clear he wanted it. So
I think a lot of Spurs fans are not keen for him to go, but understand in the Harry Kane situation, that particular situation, understand him wanting to go and are forgiving of it. I mean, Dad might remember with Calvin Phillips, after just avoiding relegation, none of us wanted Calvin Phillips to go, or Rafinha to go for that matter. But it was very much a thing of good for them, go get your bag, go get your money, go play basically better football. There's no grievances there at all. I'm sad they've gone. I miss watching both of them play football for Leeds, but I think fans are actually very forgiving of, and this is crucial, of good football players, because to compare to the other side of it is are these Leeds players who've gone out on loan who were basically terrible last season, brought in that summer, part of a pretty rubbish Leeds squad and a pretty crap Leeds era under Jesse Marsh. They've gone out on loan, and I don't think Leeds fans would happily accept basically any of them back.
No.
Now, if they were good, I think they would have. And the reason I say that is because Max Weber, who's the centre-back, who's just gone out on loan to Borussia Mönchengladbach, the Leeds fans wanted him to stay and were upset when he left because he was half decent. All these people thought he was half decent.
They're upset he left because he was the only player that said, I want to stay. I will be here and play next season.
No, but Dad, he was also
and then suddenly he's going out on loan. And he wants to go to Gladbach.
If Tyler Adams left, we'd be a bit sad because Tyler Adams is good. And, it's the complete opposite to say Brendan Aronson, who was rubbish last season. I think Leeds are happy to the back of him, So I think if you're a good enough football player and you're playing well for that club, you can basically get over more or less anything. Whether you should or not is another question.
Yeah. And there's also a difference between how you leave a club. I mean, Newcastle had 2 players leave at exactly the same, or pretty much the same time, and one of them was welcomed back with open arms and the other one wasn't. And they both went to the same club. And one was David Ginola, who had agitated apparently for a move, we thought. And one was Les Ferdinand, who didn't want to move. And every time Les Ferdinand came back, he was cheered to the rafters. Ginola wasn't. And it just depends on how the fans perceive the player has moved on. It's not necessarily true that they've moved on in that way, but that's what they've been told. So you can, So,
sorry, yeah.
Do we need to move on to what we would do, really, if the transfer window, if we think isn't working at the moment, Steve, and you were quite clear on that early on, what would you do to change it?
The problem with the transfer window is it devastates squads. Our day, but there were really more than 2 or 3 players in and out every season, and now now you're looking at a dozen going in and out. You're looking at sort of 7, 8 players going in, a new team essentially every season, and then you've got the contract, players being sold because they've only got a year left on their contract and they've got to go in one of those windows. I don't think it's to their benefit or to our benefit as support. There should be transfers throughout the season. I don't really care about whether it's in the last week of the season to try and win the league or not. I don't think that would happen very much anyway, because it's such a gamble and players need to learn systems and improve their fitness. So I don't think teams would be doing that. And I think hopefully that would reduce the number of changes that are going on and reduce this need to sell players suddenly, just because they're going into the last year of their contract and lose their value.
I think if that would happen, you would develop a whole types of players of the Sam Allardyce variety, which would be brought in specifically to stop a team getting relegated, like a
special team.
9. Yeah, a special. Absolutely. So it's like, oh my God,
special
getting relegated. Sign the never gets relegated striker along with Sam Allardyce. Pull the Allardyce lever and get them out. I think that could be quite fun. I'm dead set against it though.
I'm against the
special team.
Yeah.
So what would you do, Oisin, then?
Well, I just outlined one of my problems with that as well. I think you could have, let's say, there's a relegation battle between 2 smaller clubs and a bigger club who has more money. If the loans are going constantly, let's say Man City have tied up the league, what stops Man City from loaning out their best players to the bigger club that can afford to loan out those players and then dominating that relegation run and winning? Because I know you can already buy the league. I know money's already really important, but why make that more egregious? I don't understand at all. I think as well.
No, you go. I think I disagree with Stephen. I think it probably would happen in the last week of the season. I think that definitely would happen. Yeah,
100%.
But not to any good effect.
But
at the moment that's happening in January.
but
At the
that,
moment, the clubs that are seeing their problems, at Christmas and early January, are getting rid of the manager and buying Chris Woods.
well, that brings me to my suggestion.
Go on.
I'm the opposite of you, Dad, in what I think we should do. I think we do away with January entirely.
Yes,
right?
I agree with
Is
that.
that your agree? Okay, brilliant.
Yeah.
I think summer, fine. I get the need for a transfer window; it has to happen. But I think summer, when that window closes, you are locked in with that squad. However, I'll put some limits on it. For example, I would put spending limits in place so you couldn't spend so much money that summer. So, for example, I think that one of the potential issues is you can stack your squad and you can have loads of players sitting on the bench who shouldn't be sitting on the bench. So I put spending limits in place. I'd also put the same thing in place. We have to have so many homegrown players, maybe even increase it. That way you've got more young players having to play or having to be in your squad. And I try and find some way of limiting squad size generally. I mean, I know that's outside the transfer window issue anyway, but I think like the big club squads are out of control. And I think part of the charm of football is watching Liverpool struggle to balance, the 4 competitions they're playing in and try and win them all, with the squad they've got. Because it shouldn't just be their best 11 playing every game. It should be their squad and rotating and trying to win it through that. So I would get rid of January entirely. However, the one problem I have with that, the other problem I have, I suppose, is the manager merry-go-round becomes way more aggressive because all of a sudden, I guess keep that going all season. And I think you'd see such serious managerial churn every season. Now, I think that's kind of a worthy sacrifice for the player thing, because everyone's got less sympathy for managers anyway. But I don't know how you solve that managerial.
I think, you explain our theory with this, Dad. Yeah.
Well, my theory is, and I agree with you entirely about the January transfer window. I've got another 2 things, but one is managers also would be part of the transfer window. So you couldn't get a manager from another club. I mean, obviously, during the season. So you appoint a manager. If you want to sack him in October, you have to pick from managers who are sitting on the bench waiting because they have no jobs. That's fine. But to take a manager from another club is not allowed until the transfer window opens, and I wouldn't have a January transfer window. So therefore, in effect, you won't have a managerial churn unless you've got a whole lot of special teams managers like Sam Allardyce waiting in the wings just for the relegation teams in March and April to come in and say, right, we'll have Sam Allardyce, it's your time now.
That destroys the careers of young managers in the lower divisions getting bigger jobs. It becomes impossible for them, or it just means that everyone who wins their league gets poached to another club the following season. Doesn't work at all. Limiting the number of transfers would work. If you said to the clubs, 4 transfers a season, but allowed it to be throughout the season, and possibly a goalkeeper, because goalkeepers are a very different situation. You can't afford to stack your squad with them, but a couple get injured and you're stuffed.
Yeah,
I'm in favour of the manager transfer window. Yeah, I think if the argument is that it would destroy the careers of young managers, the argument then could be made that it would destroy the careers of young footballers by having transfer windows, because they wouldn't get their big break mid-season.
But managers are again, they're individual. They're singular. It's a singular job. They're not individuals. And you'd find managers just quitting. You couldn't stop a manager saying, "I am leaving."
Yeah,
I'm leaving this job, and then they're out of work.
That's what I was going to say. How do
you'd probably get a very rich club like Newcastle, saying to somebody, I'll give you 3 million to sack your manager. Who's out of work.
That's
I can
true.
understand.
I hadn't thought of that. That's a good point. Yeah.
All right, I have an idea as well, and it's a bit of a radical idea, and to just take it back to the media slightly. So my idea for, as you can probably tell from the opinions that I've given over the last hour or so, I don't like the constant barrage of transfer rumours and gossip and speculation. I think it's just bad for smaller clubs in terms of developing their own squad depth. So my idea, and I think I saw this on Twitter a while ago, so maybe someone else can claim this, but that there would be an embargo on rumors and transfer reporting until the first day of the season. And so you'd spend the whole summer wondering who your club have signed, who they've sold. You'd be very stressed, but there wouldn't be Twitter barrages having a go at your club or not, and then on the first day of the season, when your team walks out onto the pitch, that's when you would find out that Newcastle have signed Tonali. We signed Tonali, or we've lost Caicedo or something.
Can I tell you, the way that works is you just don't go on Twitter and you don't follow any of that, and then that's how it works for you. But
that's true.
But I think you'll find that in any walk of life, there's freedom of speech, and people can say whatever they want as long as it's not libelous.
With that idea, the big problem with
any idea that you could embargo the media, it's Leeds got a better chance of winning the Premier League next season.
I said it was radical. Ashim, what we can say.
I was going to say, I mean, it also just creates a black market of information, because what's going to happen is you'll lose the verified journalists reporting verified information. It will create a less reliable black market beneath that, which is purely gossip, which no one can verify, and everyone will buy into.
That's true. I think I'd purely be into it for the entertainment factor.
Terrible idea, Dan. Terrible idea. It's firstly not enforceable, but equally we'd be sitting here with rumours but nothing else. Yeah. Let's go back to Brighton. We're sitting here wondering in a week and a half's time whether Caicedo and I can't think of a single other Brighton player's name. McAllister and all of those, Matoma, have all gone and have no idea who they've got. But equally don't know whether to renew my season ticket if I was bothered about that, which I'm not really. But it's not enforceable, but it's also ludicrous.
It's a radical idea that it's probably enforced in somewhere in some Scandi country or something, But I think
it's more likely to be enforced in China.
Yeah, maybe.
Carry on.
My issue is just that the tapping up of players by big clubs of small clubs in the media. I really don't like that, and just the way that bigger clubs are able to manipulate the media for their own benefit, and the rumours I get a bit annoyed about. So I think,
Dan, I don't think the tapping up in the media is done by the. I don't think Caicedo was sitting there thinking, "Oh my God, do Chelsea really want me?" I don't think they learn about it in the media. That the media are just trying to get people to to click to watch the ads or click on something so they get paid. I don't think it actually affects the football at all.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I kind of think that the gaps between the bigger clubs and the smaller clubs, the gaps in football matter, and I think it's just one of those things that makes the gaps. It gives the edge slightly to the bigger clubs, in my opinion. So what I think I would just try and also. I think the distinction between gossip and factual reporting needs to be a little bit clearer in the media. But then I don't know how you'd go about that, because Twitter's such a moronic place anyway. But
that's in all of the entertainment industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's in politics as well.
That's what it is.
Yeah.
I think it's the modern world.
And it exists because people like it. If people didn't like it, it wouldn't exist.
That's true.
I think also crucially, like you said, it exists in every walk of life, but I think there is currently a generation of people who haven't got the kind of the media literacy to be able to tell the obvious fake websites from the genuine verified ones. And as people become more media savvy, that will become less and less and less the case. I do think you lose maybe some of the critical thinking. I think people can be more prone to disinformation in other ways. But I think particularly with Twitter, I think younger people are better at looking at a website and being like, that's a crap website.
Yeah.
That's going to just deliver nothing. And we'll look to things like The Athletic, like the BBC, like the the genuine sort of verified sources for information.
Do you
Would we
think
ever
that
want to go? Would we ever want to go to a place where transfer fees weren't necessarily? I mean, we wouldn't. I'm answering this question myself, really. But one of the alternatives to the transfer window that the FA put forward was that we would have to get rid of transfer fees altogether with the Bosman ruling, and therefore players would just be able to. And I don't know why actually they're linked, thinking about it, because the transfer fee has got nothing to do with the transfer window. But there's obviously some sort of financial compensation needs to take place, which doesn't happen if I was to leave my company and go to another one. I just put my notice in for 3 months. The other company doesn't pay a compensation.
So a player would just hand in a 3-month notice period and then they'd be off, basically.
Yeah.
I quite like that. And there'd be no astronomical transfer fees, agent fees.
That would kill. That would kill, though. That would kill the smaller clubs. There'd be no incentive for the smaller clubs, because everybody would gravitate to the top 6. They'd all want to play for the top 6 clubs. They'd all sit, and this is my final point, is restricting of squads. And I think Stephen got onto this a bit, but I wouldn't have loan deals really, or not many. I'd restrict them more than you. It's ridiculous the size of clubs. But stockpiling players and loaning them out. Maybe that works.
A lot of clubs, but a lot of clubs and leagues, though, their business model is built upon a dependency on the bigger clubs and the bigger leagues. So the Portuguese league is the business model of most of the clubs in that league is built on developing young players, getting high transfer fees from the Premier League, and then reinvesting that. And so, yeah, it probably would harm having the 3-month notice period would definitely harm some clubs. But also, like with loans, there are clubs that rely on their business model is having a lot of loan players to progress to the next. I think West Brom are doing that at the moment a lot. They've just got one from Brighton. And it gives smaller clubs maybe an avenue of, I guess it's developing more clubs for Chelsea and Man United.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with loans is that there are restrictions on how many loan players you can have, and indeed now, but there ought to be restrictions on how many loans a club can have put out.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting.
Certainly, I don't think loan deals should exist. Young players need to be developed, and loan deals are good for them. But I really don't see any player over the age of 22 or 23 should go out on loan anywhere. Their registration should remain with the club that's playing. And I do think the number of transfers should be limited.
Yeah, for sure.
Just tell the club, allow them to refresh their squad by 3 or 4. I suppose when I'm talking about saying there were really more than 2 or 3 transfers per season, you were really only talking about a squad of about 16 to 18 people, really. Players played, twice a week and still managed to do so on appalling pitches, probably because they just weren't so quick and didn't get hurt so easily. But so if you've got a 24-man squad, should you restrict it to no more than 6 transfers?
On the loans, I think there is a loan limit, because I think Leeds are close to hitting it.
Yeah,
there is a loan limit. Yeah, I thought so. I think the squad size. I agree with you. Like I think there should be limits on squad size. I mean, Bielsa famously said it should be like an 18-man squad supplemented by the youth players. I think that does the benefit of developing the youth players and ensuring that the 18 players are playing regularly. The only problem with it, like you say, is the injury thing, which Leeds obviously saw the worst side of 2 or 3 seasons ago.
I think if you are a big club and the incentive really is, and it's got worse with the 5 substitutes rule, because now more players get game time. So bigger clubs can say, come to us, you'll get game time, because we can put 5 of you on now. Well, it used to be 3, but now 5 of you will get some extra, will get game time. So 16 of you basically are sitting there on the bench, will get game time. So you're not going to be sitting there wondering when you're ever going to be played by big club X. So come to us. But if we don't really want you for a while, we'll just loan you out. But I think the stockpiling is something if a club doesn't want to play a player, then they should sell him, and he will have to take wages suitable for the level he's at. It's market forces then, isn't it? That's my opinion basically on the stockpiling and loan deals, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, maybe we can start looking to answer the question that we kind of try to allude to at the beginning of the episode. So,
what was that then?
it was referring to the media and the transfer window, or just transfer window talk itself. Is it all too much? So, do you guys find that transfer window rumors or the obsession with the transfer window is a bit in excess?
It isn't for me because I'm not obsessed with it. I don't really follow it or care about it. But when it's quite entertaining when you are looking at it. I'll be looking to see if Adams goes at the late on in the transfer window. I don't understand the closure of the transfer window after the beginning of the season. If you're having a transfer window, close it when the season at the start of the season.
Yeah,
not 3 weeks in.
Yeah.
Because that totally disrupts the club.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I agree as well.
I don't think it is too much for me. I'm similar to Dad. I follow the Leeds stuff pretty closely, but again, I need to know, but I want to know that. The other stuff I will find out. I know it's happening just from scrolling through Twitter, but I find out it's actually happened on Twitter, and it's much of a muchness to me, really. I mean, I think I'm so disillusioned with the money in football and the Premier League anyway, that I kind of don't like when Man City signed Guardiola, didn't they? Just today, I think they signed.
Yeah.
Like, whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's Man City adding another really good young player to their squad who will probably play for them for 5 years and then now move to Saudi Arabia the way the market's going. So I think it probably is all too much, but it doesn't have to be all too much, is what I'm trying to say.
The Man City was he'll sit on the bench for the next year.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. But then the second season will probably be amazing, won't it? But yeah, I don't know. I find it might just be that this particular transfer window has been stressful for me because I'm a Brighton fan. But there was a couple of days ago, I just got so not stressed, but just so annoyed about the whole Caicedo thing that I just kind of thought, I want him to go now for pennies, just so Chelsea fans can shut up about it. But the way that a lot of it's reported. So like when McAllister went for supposedly 35 million, I think the way that the media reports on that just differs massively, because it's either 35 million if you ask a Liverpool source or 55 million if you ask a Brighton source. And yet that suddenly spins into this whole churn of Twitterverse madness. I probably just need to leave Twitter, to be honest with you. But what do you think, Dad? Do you think it's all too much? Are you equally as fed up as I am?
No, well, I don't really follow. I don't really get involved in the transfers until, it is stressful, January transfer window, but I don't get involved in the day-to-day rumors until I can actually see a player in the shirt saying I'm there, and he's got his thumbs up and he said, I've always been a fan of this new club, and he's kissing the badge. I tend not to. I don't like the January transfer window, and we've already discussed that. And I did think it was quite stressful in January after the World Cup. Again, going back to Brighton, I was convinced Caicedo, Trossard and Mitoma would all go in the January transfer window, having had a great World Cup, the three of them. In the end, only one of them did. And it was a bit of a relief, February the 1st, I've got to admit. So, but as we've already discussed, I would have got
We're
rid
not
of
going to have
them.
any more World Cups immediately before the January transfer window.
No,
At least for a while.
well, you never know.
I don't know, Taj.
Saudi Arabia,
Saudi Arabia,
on
yeah.
2030. So there's a precedent now.
Yeah. Well, all the good players will just stay there. Yeah,
That's
they just
true. They won't
That's
go.
true. Yeah,
So that's probably a topic for another.
probably. Just want to say, you said that often it's only when players are in the shirt of the other club that you know that the transfer has gone through. But from my perspective, that doesn't even mean anything nowadays, because Photoshop means that I've seen Caicedo in hundreds of Chelsea shirts, hundreds of Arsenal shirts. I've seen Mitoma in an Arsenal shirt, and it doesn't mean anything anymore. Really.
You can tell it's fake, though, can't you? You know,
But there is
You can't. Yeah.
there is a moment when you know the transfer has taken place, and there's usually a statement has been made by the clubs themselves. That's the moment I'm talking about. I'm not actually really.
The new thing is videos or some kind of branded, like when Brighton signed Bart for Bruggen, they recreated the Simpsons theme, and they did it seems a bit silly.
painted in yellow.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess for concluding, then it seems that I'm the grumpiest one out of all of us, and I'm most fed up with it. So maybe I'm the eldest statesman of the podcast. The grumpy old man.
I think the reality is we haven't got anyone as good as Caicedo that might be leaving.
to worry about. Yeah.
Yes, probably.
It's not
Probably.
so
Yeah.
much a worry. Yeah.
Not to drag
And
on.
David knows that if he goes to Chelsea, he'll probably be rubbish at Chelsea, and that's what everyone wants, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is what we all want, isn't it? Yes.
You're-
Okay, so let's
sorry,
Brighton to Chelsea
Sorry?
hasn't got a good history, has it?
It hasn't got a great history, no. Cucurella.
not for either club, really. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
No.
So let's try wrapping it up then. Maybe I think we've probably been ranting for long enough, and if there is anyone listening into this, then they're probably sick of our voices by now.
Sorry,
but,
I've got one more question I wanted to ask, actually, to keep dragging it out. Actually, that's all right.
Go for it. Go for it.
Do you think it's going to get better or worse?
Worse.
Worse.
Everything gets worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm definitely things always get worse. Atrophy. That's what entropy.
Entropy. Yeah. Atrophy is some kind of weird disease or something.
Atrophy isn't getting anything at all, but entropy.
Yes.
Can you edit that out and make sure I say entropy?
I'm leaving that in.
I mean, it's going to get better next season because Leeds are going to win and go up and progress ever forwards. But in terms of the obscene amount of money and interference and irritating things spoiling the game, that's only going to get worse.
I think it's going to get worse because of the Saudi league as well. I think that will be a major changing point.
I think
I think they might make it better. I think the Premier League not having all the money might make it better.
Yeah, but the Saudi league.
I think there are arguments that there are definitely shallowish arguments for the fact that the Saudis will have lots of money and will be able to pay all the Premier Leagues lots of money, and the Premier League won't necessarily be the richest club. But I think the fact that it's a sports washing entity for a near fascistic state, it can't be ignored, really. But I think that's a topic for another podcast soon.
I think it is,
and I think what would be great. I think the guests, for the first episode, have been fantastic. You are more than welcome to come back when we do discuss Saudi Arabia and sports washing. I'd love for you both.
Or anything else, really.
Yes, or anything else. Yeah. And for any listeners out there, we have some really interesting podcast episodes coming up. So we're going to be talking about financial fair play, sustainability, sports washing, Newcastle ownership, Saudi Arabia, all of that. We've got some really good guests, some football finance professors, industry leaders, practitioners, and all. And then also Stephen and Oisin are also going to be coming back on soon, hopefully as well. So thank you all. It's been fantastic, and have a good evening.